I won't lie to you, July was an absolutely insane month for movies, both good and divisive. Today we're going to talk about 12 films that I saw in the month of July. Let's do it. What's up, Flick fans? Welcome back to the channel. Sequels, original films, scary movies. We're going to talk about all of them in today's video, and I need to know, what movie did you see that I did not, that came out in the month of July? I can't wait to talk about these. If you guys enjoy these monthly tier lists, be sure to drop that like down below, leave a comment, subscribe, all those things. Also, stay tuned because this week, the best movies of the year so far, some of my favorite movies of the decade, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Come on. Let's get into the first film. That is Insidious: The Red Door. Is this the fourth, fifth, sixth movie? Seventh? It's yet another Insidious sequel, and while I don't think the Insidious sequels are maybe as terrible as the reviews will tell you they are, I don't think most of them are good. Directed by Patrick Wilson this time around, behind the camera and of course in front of the camera, we're picking up with the family where they've forgotten, at least two members have forgotten all about the events of the first few films, and that year of their lives was completely wiped from their memory. That's a cool premise. I think Patrick Wilson does a nice job behind the camera here. Unfortunately, the story, it's not all that interesting. We go to college with the young boy who's now an older boy. It's so sweet to see him grow up and not be possessed. I think the MRI sequence is really cool, but other than that, you have a lot of wasted opportunities in this movie where you have potential for scares here, or you could do something other than a cliche and generic jump scare there, but you opt to go the most conventional route, and I don't necessarily want to blame Wilson as a director, but I do think he could have handled some sequences just a bit better. Beyond that, this is a script issue, to where the story, like I said, it's just not all that interesting. We spend way too much time in college developing this friendship, and yes, that's nice, and it comes to play at the end, but the end is just so predictable, it's generic, you know exactly what's coming. Really familiar jump scares every now and then, I think they're fine, but you even waste the big bad villainous entity to where I just thought there wasn't much there, and they don't really capitalize on the hype from the trailer. That being said, this film was really successful, so who am I to say it's a bad movie? Well, I'm doing it. It's going on the bad tier. Now, let's go from standard cliche studio horror to A24 horror, which you're going into this film expecting one thing. And that's what you expect with all A24 horror movies, and that is we're going to get this slow build-up. It's going to be very artistic. It's kind of like Hereditary, Midsommar, The Witch. If you don't like that type of horror movie, you're probably not going to like this, right? Well, I would say this is the best blend from A24 that I've seen when you look at what studio horror movies, the good ones, have to offer, with some jump scares, some really creepy moments, some crazy imagery, and somewhat out-of-the-box scripts every now and then, but most of the time, they keep it by the numbers. Well, this film, it has what you like, a coming-of-age story, main characters that make dumb decisions, but it's there for a reason. We're talking about peer pressure in this movie, and these kids, they're peer pressuring each other. They're saying, take this hand and go to Demon Land. But I love the idea of passing around this demonic entity like a drug, and they use it to get high, and they're really excited about it. More kids are joining, and they're videoing it and taking pictures of it and embarrassing each other, but they're like, we'll keep doing it, So it sounds silly on its surface, but the way this is executed, it's really well done. I thoroughly enjoyed my time with this film. I believe the main few performances, not all of them, but the main few are really good. But really, it's the director duo here, these brothers that come in, and they're from YouTube. They're content creators on YouTube. They've had a hand in other films, but this is their first time directing, and I want to see more. I really want to see more, because this is a great first movie. The scares, the build-up, the way that they haunt you with the camera and the imagery and the twist ending that I thought was great. I don't know if it's going to hit everyone in the same way, but I really like the way this wrapped up. So all in all, I had a great time in the theater. This is an original horror movie that rides that line of somewhat artistic, but also could play well for more general audiences. I'm going to put Talk to Me on the great tier. Talk to that. No. Next up is Bird Box Barcelona, and the first Bird Box, a huge deal, made a big impact. This one, it's like there was barely any marketing. We're doing a Bird Box spinoff, one of the most popular Netflix movies of that year that did not stay in the zeitgeist at all. It was pop culture relevant for like a month, and then that died down completely. But instead of doing a sequel to that, they're doing this spin-off in another country. The setting is beautiful. The production design is beautiful. I love the idea of what they're doing here. And there are some emotional moments in this movie. I'm not taking away from that. But the Bird Box premise is so generic in this movie. It's bigger than the original Bird Box, but the characters are just so cliche, so poorly written. I believe the idea of this movie was not executed in the least bit. And then you get to the end, you have this huge set piece and an opportunity to do something crazy here, but there is nothing. It's just standard, generic, horror thriller movie ending, and it's not even all that thrilling. I did not have a great time, obviously, with Bird Box Barcelona, and I think this is a bit of a waste in terms of potential. I'm going the bad tier. Next up, we have Theater Camp. I love this cast. Molly Gordon is great. Ben Platt executes phenomenally with the humor there back and forth is fantastic. And you have Jimmy Tatro, who I always think is really funny, playing the same character that he normally does, but really funny. So, Austin, what in the world is Theater Camp? Well, this is all about this staff of this rundown theater camp. They're in upstate New York, and they have to band together with the son of the camp director. Something happens to her. She's not available. They're banding together, and it's this documentary-esque type of movie following these characters as they're trying to keep this kids' camp afloat, and the kids that come in, they're so ready for theater camp, right? They're ready to go, but it's not the same as it always has been because the director's not here. They're scrambling. They're trying to find new teachers, and some actors come in here, and I think it's hilariously handled. This movie has a great sense of humor to it. When it comes to the plot, I do believe the plot drags on and is not as interesting in the second act as it is with the buildup, and as it is when problems start to rise, because it's like, we don't know if we can keep this camp around. We don't know how much money it's bringing in. There's a rival camp, which is always, it's kind of like Camp Rock, but not really. It's better than Camp Rock.
Camp Rock! Camp Rock!
But like I said, I really like the docudrama style. Noah Galvin is another MVP in this film. It's just a really good cast that I think could have been better story-wise, like I said, through the middle, because the pacing, it does suffer at times. But all in all, I had a good time with it. I'm going to put Theater Camp absolutely on the good tier. This one's worth a watch. We're staying in the comedy realm. We have a group of friends, 4 girls that are going out traveling to China. It's a road trip comedy. Ashley Park, Stephanie Hsu, Sabrina Wu, Sherry I mean, this is a great cast of characters. And Adelie Lim, our director here, does a nice job of blending that classic R-rated raunchy comedy style that we know from the early 2000s with, something a bit more modern and fresh, and a story that it's not very emotional at first. I mean, it's all about finding your birth mother, so you think it's going to be super emotional. Well, not really. It's more comedy-centric, which is great. There are a few jokes that don't necessarily hit, and bits that last a bit too long, in my opinion. I'm like, okay, we could have shortened that and maybe shortened this movie as a whole, but it does get surprisingly emotional at the end, and the emotional beats work just as well as the big comedy bits. It's also, like I said, very raunchy. There's one big sequence that is extremely sex-forward, so not everyone's going to love that, but I thought it nailed the type of humor that it was going for. I thought Joyride was it was a joyride. In the theater. No. Oh, boy. Dad jokes. I'm going good tier with Joyride. Here's another comedy, The Outlaws on Netflix. I did not review this film. I wanted to, and then I was like, well, I just don't feel like it. And that's not a detriment towards the movie, even though the movie itself falls flat on its face in the first 5 to 6 scenes, maybe the first act as a whole. It's not funny, awkward, cringeworthy. I didn't like the acting. I didn't like the story. I hated where it was going. I'm like, this is going to be one of the worst movies of the year.
Jesus Christ.
Ellen Barkin and Pierce Brosnan play the parents of Nina Dobrev's character, and Nina's character, Parker, she's getting married to Adam Devine's character in Owen, and it's a muck. That's not the right saying.
A muck.
But Owen starts to realize that something's off about these characters, and he begins to tie that to this bank heist that has taken place. You put 2 and 2 together, and the movie gets better. It gets so much better after a horrid first act, because once they get into, and this is surprising to me, more of the action side of things with this premise, with this film, it got a lot better. It got a lot more fun, and I think it becomes more self-aware at that point because we're doing that thing that a lot of these Adam Sandler movies have done in the past. It's funny. It's a similar people involved here, but it's kind of like that murder mystery thing where they're playing on this action idea, and Pierce Brosnan owns this role. He is so funny as we get further through the movie. Adam Devine, he's playing the same character he always plays, but again, I like Adam Devine. I know people have had issues with him specifically in this movie. He's over the top, he's the same generic. Yeah, but I like when he does that. So as this plot moves, it gets better. It's still cliche riddled. I mean, the script is not good whatsoever. And the way that it wraps up with like a dance number, like this came out of nowhere. It's so dumb. But I guess I would consider it kind of a guilty pleasure after such a terrible start. I'm going to go the meh tier for The Outlaws. Next, we have Sound of Freedom starring Jim Caviezel. This is the least controversial movie of all of these movies, right? Right? It's the true story of a former government agent that embarks on a dangerous mission to rescue hundreds of children from sex traffickers. And I'm going to take an unbiased approach to this film because you have people on both sides that I think are taking things a bit overboard. On one side, you have those who refuse to watch it because of the associations with the people involved in this film. And then on the other side, you have those that are just anybody who hates this movie or anybody who doesn't like this movie is evil. No, they're not. Let people have their criticisms with Sound of Freedom. No movie is perfect. This film is definitely not perfect, and I think both sides refusing to look at the other side, it's animosity, and this is not a movie that should cause animosity. This is a film that I think handles the material very well, and it's tackling a topic that needs to be tackled, needs to be talked about, and that is sex trafficking. And the way this is handled, it's real, it's emotional. Say what you will about the people behind the scenes. The film itself and the script, for the most part, there's one or two lines in there that's like, okay, obviously there's something there, but for the most part, I think this script is very unbiased, and I think they do a good job of focusing on what they need to focus on, and that's saving these kids. And the way that this film is handled, especially when you factor in the budget, which I like to do for movies like this sometimes, it's really impressive. I think the cinematography is good. The pacing suffers at times, but Caviezel gives a nice performance here. A little overboard with the emotions, but for the most part, it works. And I get it. If you don't want to watch the film for certain reasons, that's absolutely okay. If you're mad at other people for not watching the movie for certain reasons, fine. But taking an unbiased approach towards this film and trying not to factor in any of those things, it really worked for me. It did. So I'm going to put Sound of Freedom on the great tier. How about another Netflix film? They Cloned Tyrone. John Boyega, Jamie Foxx, Tiana Paris, and Kiefer Sutherland, who is this crazy, I didn't know he was in this movie, this crazy over-the-top villainous presence that it works so well. But it's the chemistry between our trio here. It's a full-on mystery situation. Fontaine, he's shot dead by this rival, but then he wakes up the next day and everything's fine, right? And you have this cabin in the woods like conspiracy that's at play here, and the themes that come with that, drawing comparisons to what people go through in real life and how the people behind the scenes and the government in this case, they are pulling strings in a way that is, frankly, it's kind of tragic. I mean, they play it as a comedy and they play it with humor, but what's going on here, it's a tragic way to look at the world, but there's also a lot of truth in there. So I think this script has so much to say, and if you haven't seen the film, I don't want to get too far into it. My issue with this movie at times is it does, as much as there is at the end to appreciate and respect, they just start to go off the rails in the third act, and I wasn't as impacted with this third act as I wanted to be after such an interesting setup and such a great performance, specifically by John Boyega, who crushes these roles in this film. He is so good. This is one of the best performances I've seen, and it really shows what he can do as an actor. So all in all, while I had issues with the ending, and I do believe the pacing suffers at times, I think this is a good Netflix movie. It's a solid time. Once again, a more comedic-leaning film goes on the good tier. It was a good month for comedy. Okay, Mission Impossible 7, Dead Reckoning, Part 1. What is wrong with you people?
What is wrong with you?
Not everyone who saw this movie in the theater, but everyone who didn't see this movie in the theater. I get it. Barbenheimer. Barbie and Oppenheimer and Barbie. It's a crazy time to be a movie fan. It's a great time to be a movie fan. But this deserves to be seen. Well, this and Talk to Me, they deserve to be seen in the theater. And while Dead Reckoning Part 1, it did really good opening weekend, pretty good, right? How's it going to hold all this? Barbie and Oppenheimer has just, they've knocked it down so many notches. And it's so unfortunate because I truly believe Tom Cruise is great. This is one of his best performances as Ethan Hunt. And this is one of the most interesting Mission Impossible stories I've seen. And while it is a part 1, they do such a nice job of wrapping up this specific storyline and then kind of leaving you hanging, almost like what Spider-Verse did. Lots of part 1s this year, but I didn't mind it at all. Simon Pegg is great. Ving Rhames is great. The addition of Haley Atwell is such a great addition to this franchise. And the villainous presence, this AI entity, gets a little silly at times. There's one scene where all these government agents, they're sitting down. It's just an exposition-filled scene that frankly frustrated me. But the way that scene wraps up, I'm like, I'm back in. This is really cool. So the entire movie, it's cool. It's a great time on a big screen. I am torn a bit between great and awesome, but I keep thinking about that experience, and I have to go awesome tier. Haunted Mansion, it's
Today, Junior!
It is technically a remake, but it's a very different story than the Eddie Murphy movie. But let's call it what it is, right? It's a movie that is taking a Disney ride and saying, we're gonna do something cool with this. But do they? No. Is it as bad as I expected it to be? I did not like the trailers. I thought the marketing for this film was bleh, and it's not showing it at the box office. Frankly, it's a failure on that front. But there are some moments there. Lakeith Stanfield is great in this film, and his character had a lot more to him than I expected. He's dealing with anxiety, there's grief in his past, and every character that is here, whether it's Danny DeVito or Rosario Dawson, who was really good, Owen Wilson, wow, Jamie Lee Curtis, she's there for a second, and I thought her character was a little wasted, but they all have a reason, incentive to be there in the first place, and I truly believe there are some nice thrills and chills there for kids, and I think kids could watch this, have some fun with it, and it could have that nostalgia that the original Haunted Mansion movie kind of has for me. Look, that's a bad movie. Eddie Murphy's funny, but that's a really bad movie. But I feel the same way about that some kids are going to feel about this. They're going to grow up and realize it wasn't all that good, but have some fun with it, have some nostalgia for it, and a story that gets a little more emotional than maybe I expected. Not the worst time in the theater, but not all that good. It could have been so much better. Haunted Mansion goes on the meh tier. All right, we've reached that time. Barbenheimer. Let's start with the Barb. Ryan Gosling is Ken. Amazing, spectacular, fantastic. May get an Oscar nomination. I don't know if it's the performance to get an Oscar nomination, but the way that it's, dominating at the box office and just the talk has been Barbie, Barbie, Barbie. I think at this point, regardless of whether you think that's the type of performance to get one, I think it's getting it because of how big this movie has been. The box office is ridiculous. It's making more money in its second weekend this year than most movies have made in their first weekend. That is crazy. The Barbie craze is there, but some people are watching it and saying this movie is terrible. I understand some of the criticisms, some of the complaints with the story. When they go to this real life world, it's not as good as when they're in Barbie land. And the themes that they're tackling, one or two things on the nose, but for the most part, I was really impressed with the way that they handled it. And they used satire to approach something that could be more topical, could be more relevant, and could have fallen really flat if they would have taken it fully serious the entire time. So it's a writing thing. I think the writing works in that way. Greta Gerwig does a nice job as our director here and builds this world in a way that feels real enough. I mean, it's fake, but it feels real. And it almost has that Lego movie vibe that handles it all with humor, but there's always another level, another layer to what this story is trying to do. And do they waste, the Will Ferrell character and his cohorts and everybody there? They just kind of don't know what to do with him at the end. Yeah, they do. But the ending itself, it's really emotional. So I had a really good time with Barbie in the theater. I laughed quite a bit. Again, the satire is perfect. The message will work for a lot of people. I think they could have done more with it, especially Ken towards the end. There was something I wanted them to do with his character that they didn't do, and that was a little bit of a disappointment. But the Barbie craze is real, and it's warranted. I'm going to put Barbie on the good tier. It could get close to great, but it's good for me. Finally, it's Oppenheimer, a film that I am just so high on. So high. This is one of the best movies of the year. It may just be the best movie of the year. And there's so much to love and appreciate about Nolan's touch with this film. His best script to date. I could argue Memento as his best script, but I'm going to go Oppenheimer because there's just so much to this. It's a dialogue-filled, conversational movie that relies on you being interested in these characters, in the conversation, in this real-life story that I'm seeing a few complaints about on Twitter. It's like, where's the action in this movie? I expected it to be more action-heavy. Why? As far as I know, this is based on a book that is from Oppenheimer's perspective. Now, there's that creativity thrown in because we have Robert Downey Jr. and the black and white sequences are more from his view on things, but it's called Oppenheimer. It's not called Let's Play Bomb. I just don't know where the action-heavy expectations came from. But the way that they approach and handle this film, and it's kind of handled like a thriller, like an action movie because of the pacing and the editing. The editing is just so brilliant. Jennifer Lame as our editor here. Most other movies are just not going to touch how good the editing was in this film because they make this conversation-filled movie that's relying on dialogue feel incredibly thrilling because of what they're throwing in, how fast-paced it is, but it's not fast-paced in a way that's going to lose you maybe until the final 30 minutes, and that's still where I'm hesitating. There's a lot going on, and it's really relying on you knowing the names. If you don't know the names, how are you going to keep up? So a second watch for Oppenheimer really clears that up. At least it did for me. I have seen the movie twice. I plan on going to see it again. It helped out a lot because when they're talking about all of these characters, I know who they're talking about. And if you don't know, it's kind of like you're trying to keep up. But it's not confusing in the way that Nolan's movies are normally confusing. You're jumping all over the place. There's different timelines. I mean, there are different timelines at play, but it's never confusing in that way. It's more so just knowing the name. So that's my minor criticism for a film that was otherwise spectacular. And the score, I've listened to it nonstop. Ludwig Göransson, shut up, Austin. Put it on the awesome tier. Fine. There it is. Before I rank these films, is there a movie I should have seen that I didn't see? And what is your favorite movie on this tier list? Let's get into it. All right, at the bottom, we have a nice little order here in Bird Box Barcelona and Insidious, The Red Door. On the meh tier, once again, we're in order. The Haunted Mansion, I would put that slightly below The Outlaws, which again, feels like a guilty pleasure. Let's get into the good tier, and I'm going to go They Clone Tyrone at the bottom. I think there's a lot there, but I did slightly prefer the comedy and the humor from Theater Camp. Actually, you know what? I like that documentary style. Let's go Theater Camp slightly above Joyride. I think it works just a bit better as a comedy, but obviously at the top of the good tier, Fringe, great tier, but I'm going good tier for Barbie. On the great tier, that is the order. Talk to Me over Sound of Freedom. And then on the awesome tier, we have two just awesome movies overall, but I am going to go Oppenheimer over Mission Impossible 7. Oppenheimer is clearly, for me, the best film of the month. But that top three there, Talk to Me, Mission Impossible, Oppenheimer, all three warrant a trip to the movies. Yes, even Talk to Me, because you have to see this type of horror movie with a theater. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'll be back in August, but come back to this channel before then, man. We're watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We're talking about the best movies, the best TV shows of the year, and some great TV shows coming out this month. It's a lot to do, so I got to get to work. I'll see you soon.